Let's start in the name of God, the most powerful and merciful. Today, our topic for discussion is levels of communication / flow of communication. Levels of communication, there are different levels and layers of communication. The first one is intrapersonal, the second was interpersonal, the third one is public communication, and the fourth and last one is mass communication. So, flow of communication / has also the same meaning, referring to the levels of communication, and flow in another sense is also used in a form when a person becomes automatic and he becomes God-blessed person, and if we exaggerate, then we can say that he becomes he becomes a prophet and a seer, and he got revelation from somewhere else, and he become a person of extraordinary ability. So it refers to a person and a person's individual intrinsic qualities. That's why flow has been used. Like if you look at the intrapersonal communication, so in this type of communication a person talks to oneself. So this is also called soliloquy and also called aside. These two words are used for the way when a person talks to himself, and we often do talk to ourselves when we are when we are alone, or even when we are talking to someone, we think and we talk to ourselves inside our brain. So let's start reading. Interpersonal communication is also known as self-talk or thinking. Self-talk or thinking. So self-talk or thinking. Self-talk here we will consider as a single word and refers to the ways we communicate with ourselves, and it also refers to those ways in which we communicate to ourselves. So how do we communicate? In the previous lectures we did understand that first of all we think and we make a framework, we make a skeleton of a speech, and then we start delivering and we start communication to people or to a person face to face by verbal or non-verbal means. So it is communicators' internal use of language or thought. What kind of language or thought it is? So it is the communicator's internal use of language or thought. Intrapersonal communication occurs in the mind of the individual in a model which contains a sender, receiver, and feedback loop. So it means that while communicating the individual, the person who is the sender, he has in his mind himself and the audience, and the feedback loop from the audience. Feedback loop means the feedback message from the audience. The literal meaning of the word loop is twisted to encircle a thing, but here feedback loop means the response from the receiver. Although successful communication is generally defined as being between two or more individuals, it means that successful and the real communication is between people. It is believed that this definition is too narrow because there is an exchange of messages within oneself. So as we understood that communication occurs between two persons, but the definition is narrow, the definition is not sufficient. Is here the communication is in intrapersonal, under the heading intrapersonal is with oneself. So this definition is not enough. So let's see what's happening forward. We use intrapersonal communication to plan our lives, rehearse scenarios. In this type of communication, we plan our lives, we think, we rehearse, we revise, we recall our memories, before we act them out, before we do something. First of all, we rehearse, we practice, and we think about the benefit to our lives, and tell ourselves what to do or not. And also we ask questions from ourselves, and then in response we also give reply and replies to ourselves also. So inside our mind there is a session of question and answers. The individual becomes his or her own sender and receiver. So an individual or a person becomes a sender and receiver both. This is intrapersonal communication, providing feedback to him or herself in an ongoing internal process. Inside his mind, what is going on? He asks himself question and also answer that question. So this type of communication which occurs inside the mind, and I already told you that this is also called soliloquy, talking to oneself, is known as intrapersonal communication. So intrapersonal communication can be daydreaming, nocturnal dreaming, speaking aloud. Daydreaming means when we think of things in the daytime. Or there is a proverb that build castles in the air. Sometimes we talk, and it is not necessary that what we think, what we say to ourselves, that must be correct, or that must be based on truth. Sometimes we may dream for something, and that's good, that's not bad. Dream big. Or another quotation is that prepare for the best. Work for the best and prepare for the worst. Work for the best and prepare for the worst. The second was nocturnal dreaming. That is the night time when we dream and when we think at bed and we talk to ourselves. That is also intrapersonal communication. Thinking and talking to oneself while using gestures, body movements, speaking aloud, talking to oneself. This is that soliloquy, to talk to oneself. Then writing one's thoughts or observations. Intrapersonal communication, we discussed the self-communication. Now there is another heading that to write our thoughts or observation. So what is the benefit of it? To write our thoughts and observations. It aids ordering one's thoughts. It aids ordering one's thoughts. If you have something in your mind, and if you notch down that thoughts onto the paper, it helps you remember your thoughts in an organized form. In addition, it produces a record that can be used later again, and you can keep that for record as well. Sometimes you may forget, but if you note that down, you will never forget that, because if you forget, you can consult to the written page and you can recall your memory, and that's it. Copying text to aid memorize also falls in this category. Ratification. Copying text to aid memorizing also falls in this category. It means ratification. Memorization by heart also falls in this category, because we imprint the thoughts on our brain. Next sentence, making gestures while thinking. These are subheadings in this paragraph. What are the benefits of writing one's thoughts or observation? So the first one is it aids ordering one's thoughts. Clear? The second one is making gestures while thinking. Now, what is the benefit of this one? This is another heading. Under the main heading, that is intrapersonal. Making gestures while thinking. So making gestures while thinking, the additional activity on top of thinking of body motions may again increase concentration, assist in problem solving, and assist memory. If you move your body while thinking, and if you draw maps while thinking, it will definitely help you while recalling your memory. Because once you practice something, it becomes your habit. So that's why it is important, if we do practice with the help of body movements, to memorize something and to keep something inside our mind, to recall them in times of need. So now it's enough. Write one's thoughts or observations. Another heading inside the paragraph, that is making gestures while thinking. So these are the minor headings under the main heading, intrapersonal communication. Now we are going and approaching to the next type of communication, that is interpersonal communication. Intrapersonal communication to oneself, and interpersonal communication between individuals. Let's start reading. Interpersonal communication is communication between individuals. Interpersonal communication is the communication we have with other people. Interpersonal communication is the process by which people exchange what? Information, feelings, and meaning. Information, feelings, and meaning. By meaning, what they want to say, what they want to deliver. By which medium? Through verbal and non-verbal messages. It is face-to-face or voice-to-voice communication. Interpersonal communication is not just about what is actually said, the language used, but how it is said and the non-verbal messages sent through tone of voice, facial expressions, gestures, and body language. Let us repeat the sentence. The sentence is compound. So let's read it slowly, and let's try to understand what the writer is saying in this sentence. Interpersonal communication is not just about what is actually said. What is said? The language used. Like if two persons are talking, that's not only about the language they used prior to the moment in which they are, but also how is it said, and the non-verbal messages sent through tone of voice. It is not only about the language they are using, but also the non-verbal messages. It means that when two persons are talking, they are not only concerned with verbal communication, but also they are concerned with non-verbal communication. As we are discussing here, that tone of voice, facial expressions, gestures, and body movements. Now come to the next one, the next level of communication, that is public communication. So, public communication refers to public speeches that we deliver in front of audiences. Audiences are the listeners. Audiences means listeners who listens to you. So public communication is that type of communication in which you are a speaker, speaks in front of people or speak to people. Public communication serves three main purposes. What is the purpose of public communication? To entertain someone, to persuade someone, and to inform someone. Or we can say that the purpose of public communication is entertainment, education, information, persuasion. These are the purposes of public communication. It is different from other forms of interaction in that it is different from other forms of interaction in that it requires greater levels of planning and preparation on the part of the speaker and involves less direct interaction. It is different from other forms of communication, that is intrapersonal or interpersonal, because in that there is less direct speech, there is less preparation, because in that type of communications, like for example in intrapersonal, a person is only indulged with oneself, and in interpersonal communication he is talking to individuals directly, face to face, and public communication is different from those two, because in this type public communication, under the heading we may communicate to the public and we may deliver our message either directly or indirectly. So in both cases we are addressing a mob of people, a variety of people, a gathering of people. So we need preparation, we need to make a framework, we need to think, we need to look for the correct language, the grammatical language. So here in this type of communication, a great burden lie upon the shoulder of the speaker. Audience members still interact with the speaker via mostly non-verbal symbols. In this form of communication, non-verbal symbols are used, but there is a lesser degree of give and take than there is in one-to-one conversation. But there is not asking direct questions from the speaker. For example, if a speaker is addressing the audience mostly listens. The audience mostly listens and they do not ask questions. They just use their non-verbal symbols. This is what the writer means, and this is what the fact and reality is. The last one, that is mass communication. Mass communication is to do communication with people at large. Public communication is also communication with people at large, but that is the direct, or that is voice to voice. If the communication is voice to voice communication, that is indirect communication through a telephone or through any other media, but the group of people is limited, that is finite. The number of people will be known, but in mass communication, the number of people who is audience, that is infinite. That may be spread round the globe, like for example newspapers, television, radio, and other means of technology. Nowadays these are the means of mass communication. So for example, if an incident happens here, that incident may be seen at the same time by the whole world, by an infinite number of people. So this is what we mean by mass communication. Mass communication refers to any type of media that is used to communicate with mass audience. Example of mass media include books, television, radios, films, computer technologies, magazines, and newspaper, as these may be watched or seen or read by a variety of people, by a great number of people. Although mass communication does include certain computer technologies, it does not include technologies like email, that is used to communicate one-to-one with someone. Not all means of technologies are involved, the writer says. And he gives us an example of email, that an email is a message delivered to a finite number of people that can't be delivered to an infinite number of people. Mass communication is responsible for giving us views of events, issues, and people from cultures that differ from ours. As I earlier told, that this type of communication is the communication of journalism, the communication of media, mass media. That's why it's different from the other types of communication. It enables us to learn what is going on in distant places in the world, and let us learn the viewpoints of people and culture. And the final sentence is that mass communication enables us to know about the whole world. In simple words, I would like to say it gives us the opportunity to know about the cultures of the whole world and to see the unseen. To see the unseen by a single click nowadays through the channels of mass media that are television, radios, computer, and magazines and newspapers, we may reach to the things that were sometime unreachable to the people. So that's the completion of your midterm course. And if you have any question still, you may ask me freely. You may write down your questions in the comments below, or you can ask your questions in our WhatsApp group, or you can ask me questions directly from me on my WhatsApp account. So thank you very much, and best of luck for your exam.